A Cricketing View, an irregular podcast about cricket and other things. Hello and welcome to a new episode of this podcast. This episode comes after several months of silence, and it's basically happening because some interesting cricket happened in the last month. India have been in England. They've played a test match against New Zealand and then four against England, and they've won two of them and lost two of them. And to discuss this series and to review it, I have two mainstays from two prominent cricketing middle orders. I have Sid Monga, who's been a stellar all-rounder for Cricinfo for nearly a decade now. He writes features, he does reporting, he does ball-by-ball commentary, he sends me statistics. I've known him well for like 2 years now, 3 years. Welcome, Sid.
Thank you. When you say middle order, which one am I, Rahane or Pujara?
Oh, you're Jadeja.
I don't have a sword right now. Otherwise...
You're the first name on the team sheet.
Oh yeah, I've heard that from you, attributed to our other guest, that Jadeja should be the first name on any Indian team sheet.
Yes, that is an opinion Daniel and I share. Which brings me to my other guest, Daniel Norcross, who's also a stellar all-rounder in the Test Match Special batting order. He does commentary, he writes, he participates in quizzes, and he has also become a stellar podcaster over the last 3 or 4 years. Welcome, Daniel. Welcome back. You were here for previous reviews, and it was a lot of fun. So hopefully you'll have some fun today as well.
Carter, it's always fun. It's always fun catching up with you, and hopefully we will generate some interest for the listeners with some opinions that don't necessarily always get aired. And as I know we like to do, we may stir up some people in the process. And I would also like to confirm that you, Carter's, myself, and Andy Zaltzman are all firmly of the opinion that India has got 10 selections to make every time they go out to play a test match, because one of them should be on the team sheet every time until he chooses no longer to play, and that is indeed Jadeja.
He's good at everything. I mean,
he's just good at everything. I mean, look, even when they didn't play him in the World Cup, they made sure that he was fielding from third over of every game somehow. Rohit was usually, a bit of a tight hamstring, and on would come Jadeja to take spectacular and unbelievable match-turning catches. Yes, he's everything. He's superb.
Well, I mean, Rohit Sharma had knee trouble on the 5th day at the Oval. I mean, afterwards he was asked about it. He said, "Well, the physio says take it 1 minute at a time. Don't think too far into the future." That's like, who can argue with that?
He's a man after my own heart, Rohit. If I could just open the batting and then get out and sit in the changing room and read and watch the telly, that's how I would play cricket forever.
I mean, frankly, some of his batting in this series has been as if he's been standing at the crease and in a armchair and reading. I mean, this is something I would like to touch on at some point in this conversation, which is that there are some players who you watch them and your own sense of calmness is disturbed. They aggravate you, and there are others who enervate you. Rohit Sharma seems to me like this guy who just all his movements seem to be calculated to show you how slowly movements can occur when you're batting.
Yes, and that's absolutely correct. And it doesn't make any difference the speed of the ball. And
yeah, so, exactly.
The ball can be bowled at 45 miles an hour or 95 miles an hour, and he's still determined to point out to you that you are in haste. You are in a rush. He is absolutely not in a rush. He will do what he needs to do in the time it takes him to do it. And then very occasionally, he'll think, it's coming up to lunch. I'm not sure. It's a bit warm today. I don't think I fancy being there after lunch. Let's see. Oh, they've just put deep backward square leg out. He's going to bowl a short one, isn't he? Okay. Bing. And he'll send it down there. And they go tuck the bat under the arm. It's a shame, but man's got to do what a man's got to do. and off he trots. That's the only way to get him out, is when he's decided he's had enough.
You know this, Sid, here's the statistic for you. As test opener, Rohit Sharma has been stumped 3 times and bowled twice.
Oh, wow. Stumped 3 times.
Oh,
This is as test opener.
And I'm sure it's not his back foot getting dragged down the wicket by
No. It's by miles. It's like he's trying to hit like Nathan Lyon like out of the city or something.
I think he's offended. I think he's offended by Nathan Lyon's bowling. I think he can't understand how an off spinner can have 400 wickets, and this to him is just an outrage. And Nathan comes on to bowl, doesn't he, with that slightly timorous look on his face, like I've said this before, but he's like somebody who comes up to you when you're having a cigarette at a train station between trains when you've changed trains, and comes up and says, "Have you got a spare? Have you got a spare cigarette?" and basically Nathan Lyon approaches the crease like that guy, and Rohit's like, what is he doing on a cricket field? So, to get away from me, stop it. So I can see why that's a really good matchup. Lyon is probably kryptonite to someone like Rohit.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't. The stumpings are not like he's being dragged out of his crease and he's stretching and it's gone past the outside edge and someone's whipped off. It's not. He doesn't even turn back. I mean, there's not even an attempt to go back.
It's contempt is what it is. It's contempt that he has for them, and I admire that in a batter. I was brought up with Viv Richards, and he used to walk out to the only man I know who would literally walk on after a wicket had fallen, and bowlers would be in despair. Normally, you've just taken a wicket, and as we all know, every bowler's thinking, "Great, we've got someone new to the crease," and then Viv would walk on, they go, "Oh no," and they would visibly shrink because he sort of gave this. It was just like command of his space, but also kind of contempt for what they could do. And Rohit, I mean, during this series, I thought Rohit reached those kind of levels of imperial splendor and grandeur. I half expected him to be brought out on the field on velvet cushions by 4 people. Carrying him out there and then placing him there. Your crease, sir. Thank you. Off the rest would go. He would very slowly and languidly drive bowlers to distraction.
The exact opposite of Rohit Sharma is Rory Burns. Rory Burns moves so much, like from the time the bowler sets off on his run till the moment he actually meets the ball. It's like it is like you imagine like 3 orthogonal dimensions, and you see Rory Burns, and he sort of twists space around him. It's a whirl.
And I wonder how Rohit would react to having to bat with Rory Burns. Like if we formed a combined 11 of these 2 teams and we had Rohit Sharma and Rory Burns open, I think Rohit would refuse. He would just say, "Matt, I'm retiring hurt. I'll come back once you're out or something."
He would stand at the non-strikers and facing the wrong way. I can't watch this. There's too much movement.
It is. Do you know what it reminds me of? Like, there was a test match played in 2019 in England when everybody's batting technique looked like Rory Burns because there was a 70-mile-per-hour crosswind at Old Trafford. And there was the first day of I think it was the 4th test, wasn't it? And it was so windy at one point, the game was stopped for 5 minutes because like an entire gale blew a load of crisp packets across the outfield. And it was the windiest I've ever seen. And it was the day when famously people thought that Jofra Archer clearly wasn't trying hard enough for England because he couldn't bowl at 90 miles an hour.
I remember that.
Even though it was 13 degrees and it felt like about 6 degrees because there was a 70-mile-per-hour crosswind. And every time he got to the crease, he was being buffeted this way and that. But if you looked at all the batters at the other end, and I was watching it intently, their bat would come up and the wind was blowing the bat like either away from them or towards them, depending on which end they were, and whether they were left or right-handed. And Rory Burns looks like he's perpetually playing on that day. So, hey, ooh, I mean, at the point at which he actually addresses the ball, because I guess we've all 3 of us done this, he's actually kind of in line and the bat's coming through pretty straight most of the time. But it's it's the buffeting that takes place before it, which is kind of bizarre to watch.
Why is that so, Dan? We've often wondered why England openers are mostly very idiosyncratic in their techniques. Is it the pitches where you don't know where you can score your runs? I mean, in India, you can just drive and you have your areas where you can score runs. Here, are they a product of these pitches?
Quite definitely. I mean, if you look, and Kartikeya will have crunched the numbers on this in the last, I want to say 5 or 6 years, maybe it might be slightly fewer. Batting at the top of the order in England for anybody has been really hard. I don't think there was an Indian opener who got to 50 in the 2018 series until the Oval Test. And the England opener, the only England opener who did, I think, was Alistair Cook. And, he got 12,500 Test runs and played in England for all of his life. So I think what happens is that you're told as a red ball opener in England that it's the hardest place to bat and the ball will move in an exaggerated way. So you gear yourself to this peril, basically. And so your technique then is not a smooth, fluid one. It's one that anticipates sharply deviating deliveries both off the pitch, because the seams on a Duke ball, as you know, are so much more proud. And the pitches that they're playing on, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, have all been on these surfaces where they've got new drainage in. So the ground staff absolutely pour buckets and buckets of water on the outfield and indeed the square to the lead up to the game, because everywhere goes exceptionally dry. Even when it's, you guys will think, oh, it's a cloudy day on the 3rd day or 4th day of a test match, that'll be good for bowling. It's nothing like as simple as that now, because the pitches themselves have become more like overseas pitches. And I think it's part of the reason why, if you look at this whole series of matches, one of the interesting features is that England were either on top or toe to toe with India at the beginning of each test match and fell apart towards the end. And the one they won at Headingley, they got so far ahead in the first innings that India couldn't catch up. But because India were close enough to them in the other games, India could go away, right? Because England's bowlers and England's batters are geared towards the pitches they play on. And in England, not the test grounds, they have this exceptional drainage, but Chelmsford doesn't, and Taunton doesn't, and to a degree Durham doesn't. And so if you're playing on these kind of grounds, which you do quite a bit, you'll come up against these bowlers bowling 71 miles an hour, and a ball will just nibble away and nibble back in. So like Rory Burns, they're all gazing at this ball going, what's it gonna do? What's it gonna do? And it kind of works in the first innings because it maximizes their chances. By the second innings, what you want is someone who's like, well, the ball's not going to do anything. The pitch is flat. Look at how India won the Oval Test. They won the Oval Test by playing a classic outside England test for the second half. They batted with complete confidence in the surface and the ball. And then when they bowled like people who need to take wickets in the subcontinent. We had catching covers, we had catching mid-wickets, like one slip at most a lot of the time, and the bowlers using variations. Just with Bumrah.
And attacking the stumps all the time.
And attacking the stumps all the time. That's exactly right. Whereas England's bowlers have got this metronomic groove. So you look at Ollie Robinson, you go, oh, he's going to be great for English conditions. Could also be handy in Australia. But actually, when the surface has become a bit more subcontinental, where was his variation? Where was his slower ball? Where was his reverse swing? And was he attacking the stumps enough? Well, not really. So, they're a product of their environment, which is totally understandable. And India's fast bowling environment requires different skills and different invention, I think. And we saw that writ large in the contest.
Which brings me, I think, I tend not to worry too much about selections and stuff, but I do think that England might have benefited in two places. One is by playing Mark Wood at the Oval, and the other is by letting Zach Crawley have a longer run, because he seems to be a much more Australian subcontinental sort of player who's going to hit through the line and stuff. And I think he would have enjoyed himself at the Oval or later on and at Lords, or even at Headingley once you got into the second day and later. I mean, it was still doing a bit, but it wasn't sort of, going like 3 inches either way.
I think the issue with Crawley actually was it was a confidence thing, because, and also, look, England, I don't get into selection too much, but England did, I think, realise that they'd messed up the whole composition of a Test match side, which should generally have older batters and younger bowlers. And they started the season against New Zealand with the youngest top 7 they'd ever had. And a diabolical selection in James Bracey as well, by the way, which was not because James Bracey's not a good player, but because he's a number 3 left-hand batter, not a number 7 keeper. And so there were occasional moments where England's selection, I think, is open to question. And by the end of the series, they'd actually become more solid-looking as a batting unit, because Dawid Malan has played a lot of first-class cricket. Not recently, but he's played a lot of it, and he's older, and he knows the game a bit better. Whereas Crawley, I think, he's only 22, 23. I genuinely think his confidence was at such a low ebb that they know that he's good and they don't want to destroy him. And they know that actually what they've been doing is a questionable selection policy of taking 22-year-olds and taking them out to county cricket. Because there is, and I don't know what you guys feel about it, I don't know what the right time is, but there is a point where somebody has played too much county cricket without playing international cricket. And there's a point when they've not played enough. And I think England have veered occasionally with the selections that don't look right. It's been when they've picked on either end of that spectrum. When, the sweet spot's like a 26, 27-year-old, isn't it? Who knows his game, has maybe played 4 or 5 Test matches. Those are the ones that you then want to see come forth. And Crawley will come again. It's just not right now,
Sid, when batsmen are not doing well, in the parlance of your publication, when batters are not doing well, we sort of tend to, there's always this clamor for, let's drop this guy. They're very enthusiastic about that. Some of us, not anybody in this conversation, but we know people who are extremely enthusiastic about this idea, of wielding the axe. But especially in England, I've always felt this, that there are openers and especially top order players who at the start of the tour have to go through a lot of very seam friendly conditions, and then they get low scores, and then they get dropped, and then someone else comes in, and this has happened to India and Australia as well, and they get in at the Oval or at Sydney and they make runs. I think it happened to Murali Vijay in 2018, but for some reason KL Rahul survived the axe and he made 149 at the Oval. And, I think that innings may have something to do with why he was still in contention, because KL Rahul started out as a prodigy at one point when he first came in. In fact, until Rohit Sharma's century at the Oval, the last 5 centuries by an Indian opener outside Asia were made by KL Rahul. There's not been another player since Murali Vijay made a century at Brisbane in 2014. All the centuries by Indian openers have been by Rahul outside Asia. But, KL Rahul, did he change his game, or was it just like the stat? What should I call it? Like the slow motion efforts of Rohit Sharma at the other end, which sort of slowed him down, calmed him down,
So with Rahul, I think my first theory that I have with Rahul is that he's too good to be just a one format player.
Yeah.
But he's not quite Kohli.
Well, not yet.
Yeah. So whenever you see him coming off a break where he has not played a lot of T20 and he comes into the Test side, he does phenomenally well. Once he does that. On the back of it, he's now in all 3 sides. Once tours start having all 3 formats, then IPL comes in, then his game is a little bit all over the place. Not all over the place. It's a little harsh to say all over the place. But that discipline that he needs early in the innings, which in England or Australia is not quite there. It's not a case of Kohli, who batted quite similarly in 2018, and this time he did leave a lot more in the first test, in the second test, and then by the third test, Anderson did change his game plan. He started bowling everything in, and then waited for the ball to seam away, which is what got him out in that. I mean, it looked like a drivable ball, which he wasn't driving in the first two tests that early in the innings, in the first over of the innings.
Yeah, I think that one he just saw the length and he couldn't resist it.
Yeah, he has 100 under his belt.
That was such a surprising dismissal, wasn't it? Because we kind of got so used to watching Rahul having worked out what to do that it was almost like he just forgot. I mean, that was all that it felt like to me, that he had reined himself in so much. He was going so slowly at one point. I mean, one game he had 18 off 100 balls, and it was terrific to watch in a way, actually, because it's a 5-day test match. There's plenty of time. You can do what you need to do. And you're putting the miles it put into England's bowlers' legs was really important, actually, by the Oval, because you saw the exhaustion in Anderson and Robinson, and it wasn't just that they weren't suited to the pitch; they just didn't have the zip as well because they played too much. And part of that was because KL Rahul was taking loads of balls, and I think there was I know you can do things with numbers that are specious, but Cricketviz had done an analysis of when a side's openers bat for more than 100 balls, and what a difference that makes to you in what, just one innings, just one opener in one innings and two openers in one innings, and then all the way through. And if you can get to 4 openers each batting 100 balls, you basically win the game. You certainly don't lose it. You basically can't lose it. And he took that approach, and that's why the wicket was like a kind of there's a KL Rahul in there talking on the shoulder. I mean, it was so uncharacteristic. And then he did kind of get back into it. And let's also point out that, when India had their collapses, maybe this is true of all collapses, but their ratio of false shots to dismissals was ludicrously high. It's a bit like, when England bowled out Australia for 60. I mean, they every time they went wrong, they went out.
The 78 all out, the first 5 Indian wickets were all caught by the wicketkeeper, I think. That doesn't happen that often, right? I mean, the edges are usually not that reliable, for want of a better word.
But the same happened with England at Lord's in the second innings, where every mistake they made was just resulting in a wicket.
Yeah,
that's true.
Speaking of batsmen who you play a lot of balls, and batsmen who are set in their ways. You know who I'm coming to. Our friend Cheteshwar Pujara is basically middle-aged at this point. He's not going to. There's no way he's going to change. I mean, it seems like he's. It seems to me the purest barometer of how a wicket is playing.
How well a bowler is bowling.
And how well a bowler is bowling. It's like when Cheteshwar Pujara is playing a lot of square cuts, it means that the ball is not moving, because then there's a wider range of lengths to which he aims the square cut. Because otherwise, he just won't aim. If it's seaming, he becomes like a crab. He becomes like a tortoise. He goes into like we
had that wonderful moment, didn't we, when he hadn't scored off like 37, 38 balls.
Yeah.
And there's this great stat, if you can keep somebody quiet for 20 balls and you'll get them out. But you don't feel like that with Pujara. He doesn't care. He literally does not care. And
I think he laughs at these. He takes a print out of these stats, locks his door and sits in a corner and laughs at them.
Yeah, definitely. I was really pleased to see that, because I think there was a little bit of a difference in the second innings of the third test, that I saw his feet move more freely, but that could be exactly for reason you're saying, Kotsukaya, that actually the pitch had eased. It was just that the conditions were easier, and so he went, okay, well, I'm prepared to be positive. And when he's not prepared to be positive, he's more negative than Dom Sibley. It's just a lot more attractive to watch, because when he did get that single and the crowd erupted. English and Indian fans erupted when he was 1 off 39 or something.
Yeah.
The camera went to him, And he just had this little smile just teasing on his lips. Yeah. I'd have been perfectly happy actually to play another 10 dots. I'm kind of annoyed I got the single.
I mean, he sort of gets into this zone where he's defending as little area as he can get away with. That's one of the reasons why I think he gets out so often to like outside edges where the ball is almost on off stump. That doesn't happen.
He makes
to a lot
you do
of guys.
that. I mean,
yeah.
Otherwise, he makes the ball unplayable balls to get you out.
Most batsmen, they want to make the bowler bowl straight so they can hit the square leg. But this guy doesn't hit anybody to square leg unless it's outside leg stump.
Like till the point he thinks there is even 5%, 10% risk in closing the face, he will not close the face. He will show you the face.
Yeah.
And same with opening the face. If he has to take a single to cover, he knows he has to open the face of the bat. And he will not till the point the ball is moving until the point the ball is bowled on a good length. If it's short or like really full, then he will. And again, I think one of the things we were discussing with him not scoring as much of half volleys these days could be with the straighter mid-off in place. Because he likes to drive. He likes the off drive and not the cover drive. And I think the teams have wisened to it and they've placed the mid-off pretty straight to him.
So here's a question for both of you, which is he different in 2021 from what he was in 2018? Well, he's 3 years older, but that slows him down maybe, but I don't know. Is he different, Daniel?
Is he different? I think he's less scary to England bowlers because they know what his method is. And England's bowlers have developed over the last few years, over the last 10 years really, an inordinate amount of patience. England's fans haven't, because they look at Jimmy Anderson, a man with 632 wickets, and question every time he takes a new ball, why is he bowling it too short? Why is he bowling it too short? Do you think you know better than him about what he's trying to do? But what he's happy to do, I mean, he said it himself. He sets himself a target of a wicket in a spell. So he's not after 2 wickets. As far as he's concerned, if it's going to take him 4.5 overs or 5.5 overs to set up that wicket and get that wicket, then he's fine with that. That's what he wants to do. It's not like PlayStation cricket with him. And I think that with Pujara this time, England's bowlers just bowled the right lengths of lines at him, knowing that he couldn't really hurt them as such until he was on a better wicket. And then, the balance had gone in favour of his type of batting and away from their type of bowling. So they were both sides were playing like an attritional game when Pujara was at the crease. Whereas in days gone by, I think they might have looked at Pujara and gone, "Oh God, how do you get this guy out?" Rather than thinking, "Well, we'll just sit in." And it made for glorious stalemate. I mean, much better stalemate than watching Sibley. I'm sorry to come back to Sibley, but there are times when you can look at Sibley's numbers and look at Pujara's numbers in terms of runs scored and balls faced and think these two guys must be very similar. They're totally different. With Sibley, if the ball is not on his knee or hip, he will not score. So you could see there's relish in the Indian bowlers. I mean, because there's nothing a bowler likes more than a maiden. They prefer a maiden to a wicket, for God's
sake.
Yeah. Pujara can take it to like extremes, which Sibley sometimes doesn't. He, like at Lords, he had that concentration break and he had a drive that Pujara will never. I mean, Pujara will give up cricket if he has such a shot.
Wasn't that amazing? I mean, that was a bit like the Rahul drive. It came out of nowhere because it was a ball that he's never attempted to drive before. It eschewed a load of half volleys that he literally just managed to get just beyond sort of 10 yards away from his body, really, because his bat was continually turning every time he played it. He was terrified of the half volley. You're right. I mean, it's a different kind of thing that you're watching with Pujara and Sibley. Sometimes, though, it feels like you're in the same phase of play, I guess. That's what it is. But the aesthetic and what the bowlers have to do when bowling to those two batters is completely different.
That's an interesting way to think about Sibley. I mean, he's basically Pujara, but with even fewer scoring shots. Yeah.
Oh, many fewer. It's down to like
even
2 or 3. And then
narrower
he got
range.
out to it twice. He got out to the one shot that he does score runs off. Remember, he was caught at short
mid-wicket.
Yeah.
They seem to have set the field for that.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Oh, and it was clever because essentially what they were saying was, if we don't get so Sibley had sort of stopped getting out bowled because he'd stopped leaving it. He kept leaving the ball and being surprised that it hit his off stump. So he'd obviously thought about that. So then the next thing is, how do you get him LBW? You don't have a lot to play with, at international level. You've only got like really a sort of 2 inches around the outside of the stumps, haven't you? In reality, and so they figure, well, when he hits the ball, it's going to go to mid-wicket. So if we have a mid-wicket, he'll probably get out. It's just a pretty good way of thinking about it, really.
India love a leg side field. India, it's an insurance against a bad ball. There are no easy leaves for the batter. You always on. They love a leg side field.
And the stumps are in play, so it's very attacking as well.
Any excuse to have a leg side field in India will take it.
But I thought that was one of the big features of the series overall, actually. And it's been creeping into English cricket a lot more. And some people may say it's not rocket science, but I've been watching cricket in England since 1976. And essentially, the outswinger caught at first, second, third slip keeper is the sort of standard. That's the standard field of dismissal. This series, and it was happening last year and the year before as well, I think partly with the introduction of wobble seam, which everyone's very excited about, which is essentially just slightly easing pressure from one fingertip or the other fingertip, really, and then not knowing which way the ball will go. But if you pitch it just outside off stump, so many were coming back in. It was a feature of Robinson's bowling. It was a big feature of
Shardul Thakur bowled a brilliant wobble seam.
Exactly. And
although that might have been an accident. That might have been an accident. I mean...
Well, the word wobble is one that often comes to mind when you think of Shardul Thakur, for reasons that may seem unfair. But he is the best seam bowler who looks like Rangana Herath in the world. He kind of approaches the wicket like a slightly larger Indian version of Rangana Herath, and
he's after Ian Botham's nicknames. Each of his nicknames. He's taken a beefy. And he's taken golden bollocks also because he's bowled this.
And what golden balls though they've been. I mean, to get Root out with one that did absolutely nothing when he's in almost matchless form, that takes like a pact with the devil, frankly. I mean,
he got Root to play spectacularly down the wrong line. I mean, a couple of stumps down the wrong line. And the second time he got him played on.
I mean, it's genius.
Inexplicable.
It is inexplicable. It may be that he just got a bit lucky in this series because there's a little bit of that. So when he got his 50 in the first innings at the Oval, he could so easily have been out within a ball, 2 balls, 3 balls. Yeah, very easily. But he rode his luck, didn't he? And so much so that I was on with Jared Kimber doing SEN commentary into Australia and New Zealand, and Jared was saying, "This guy is a slogger. He's not a batter." I said, "Look, he got 50 in the first innings." Yeah, that was entire slog.
Jared's right.
He then unfurled a beautiful cover drive. I said, "Well, look at that. It's a beautiful cover drive." He said, that was a half volley. It's a long half volley. He's not. I mean, he's a competent number 9 at best, is what Jared was saying. And I thought, well, everything that Jared was saying made sense to me. Yeah. But the end result of Shardul is that you get more runs and more wickets than you expect. So either he's having a purple patch of luck, or maybe he's better than our eyes see. And maybe part of the reason that we don't see it is because he does rather waddle to the wicket. When he's batting, it doesn't feel a bit chaotic. But there are lots of ways to skin a cat in cricket, aren't there? And he seems to be pretty effective. He did it. I mean, he did it in Australia, for God's sake.
Yeah. He has a lot of awareness about him. I mean, in the first innings, he knew that if he tried to bat properly, he would get out anytime. In the second innings, he got a much better wicket. And it was a time where any number 9 or number 8 walking in would have had a slog. He knew the awareness. He had the awareness that the wicket is good and you need all the runs you can get. And he batted really properly, like a proper number 7, and not 8 to 9.
Well, wasn't that fascinating though? Because that partnership between Punt and Tucker, you see, this is classic. If you'd watched that series and assumed that people would just repeat how they behaved the time before, England had got back into a really strong position. I think India were already 213 or so ahead, 6 wickets down, and the expectation of everybody was, well, both of these guys will slog, and actually, that partnership was one of profound intelligence from both players. And it was, in many ways, I think, what won the game. Because, had they slogged and got out, had England needed 260, 270 with all that time, then something, I'll tell you one thing that wouldn't have happened, was that straight after lunch on the last day, Root came out with intent because they suddenly they thought they needed 230 odd to win. And he hit the first ball from Jadeja to the paddle sweep for 4. And then Hasib Hamid, for the first time in the match, decided he wasn't going to pad away Jadeja if he bowled into the footmarks. He opened his body up to try to find the single into the open offside because they now had to get on with it more, and that precipitated the collapse. So the partnership that happened all that time before, I think, brought Hasib Hamid's wicket way later, if you get my drift, because it had changed the run-time equation. And it was so unexpected if you just think of players as being unadaptable computer game characters that have had their attributes programmed in, and they will then repeat them over and over again. Because clearly that partnership was one of, as I said, profound intelligence, actually.
I don't think Shardul Thakur has a cover drive. I think he has, or a straight drive. I think he has a drive which he sort of generally aims in vaguely different directions. But I think your earlier point was right, because he has been around for 10 years. He has played a lot of matches and a lot of first class games, and he's never really been good enough to be a 7 or a 6 for Bombay. But he averaged like 17 or something for Bombay. So he's not like a ranked tail ender, So he's had a lot of experience of these situations, I think. Where
it's like an Ollie Robinson, really. He's like Ollie Robinson.
He gets a 20, and then that's a lot of runs. That makes a difference between whether you're defending 160 or 225. And
well, let's contrast. I mean, if you contrast the Thakur and Robinson. Robinson played for me one of the most brainless shots and the most brainless.
Exactly. Yeah.
When he came in the first innings, he had Chris Woakes at the other end on a pitch that had eased. He spent 3 balls flailing about desperately. Then he took a single off the last ball of the over, so that he was facing Jadeja, and Jadeja bowled into the footmarks, and he aimed a wild heave. Now, that Robinson has the capacity with the bat that's similar to Shardul. He's got similar kind of numbers, and we saw him on his debut at Lord's play really well against the New Zealand Quicks. So it's there, but his brain didn't adapt to that situation, where Shardul's did. So
I mean, same with Moeen Ali in that innings, same with Ollie Pope. Yeah, those 3 wickets was the difference between India being behind by 90 and 200.
200, yeah, exactly, because the pitch was so easy then. I mean, one of the remarkable things about the Oval Test, I reckon, is that if you were there or if you watched all of it, from the end of the first session on the second day to the end of the first session on the 5th day, so 3 whole days, your eyes told you that getting a wicket was really hard, really hard. So if you were a batter in that situation, this was the time to fill your boots. And you're right. I mean, Moeen's got 5 Test hundreds, and he played like, right, well, we're 60 odd ahead. We need to just put more pressure. Let's have a whack now. We're far enough ahead. These are bonus runs.
He played like
come to think of it, I think they did the same thing at Lord's.
Yeah.
I mean, they were 390, but they could have stretched that to 500. I mean, it's not like.
To be fair, Siraj was in the middle. Siraj bowled like a really, really excellent, intense spell at that time. Here, Indian bowlers were leg and leg. The pitch was just really flat. Lords never got this flat.
But I want to bring up like 2 things over here. One is I think I'm curious what you guys think about Joe Root, because he's come into this series averaging 30 in England over the last 2 years or 3 years. And I mean, if you had him and Rohit Sharma batting together in this series, you would think these bowlers are not that good. I mean, and these wickets are featherbeds, all of them. They both have enormous amounts of time. They meet every ball perfectly calmly in the middle of the bat. But Joe Root's done worse against less hostile bowling in just the very recent past. Why does that happen? Is that just something? Is that just noise in your control figures, Sid, or is that something more, Daniel?
As we speak, I'm looking at control figures, so I'll let Dan go and then I'll come with control numbers.
So what the naked eye saw, I guess, was that he was stiller at the crease. That earlier on in this, well, not this year, I suppose, the back end of last year and the year before that, when you watched Root, you could almost see his brain working. And this year, it's been like you can't see his brain working. And I don't quite know what I mean by that, except that just as a commentator, you're watching and you're thinking, he's worried about the ball that's nipping back. He's worried about, and these aren't things that I was just projecting onto him. You could see slight difference in his trigger movement, slight difference in where he was actually hitting the ball. Once he got worried about being LBW or bowled, there was more exaggerated front foot movement when he's basically a back foot player. You look at Root and the balance, why he is so good is, and why he has so much more time is because he's essentially on the back foot. So he's got that extra split second.
The square cut is his bread and butter.
And it was his nemesis on the oval, but because for once, it's like, oh my God, he's just played on to an innocuous ball that was just one run every other part of the year. But of course, balance of probabilities, numbers, and averages is that if you play that shot 150 times, then at least once, you're going to drag it back. So we shouldn't have been that surprised. It's just that it happened. And I think the other thing I've seen is there's a rotation, by which I mean, I guess we're all a bit fixated with Bradman and the Bradman method, but also like looking at Steve Smith and this business of where the bat comes from and through and round, and it's sort of almost like a figure of eight in a way.
Yeah.
And he had got that rhythm back in, so that when the back press into the forward press just was always perfectly timed. So because he's got that extra time because of the way he sets up, and because he got his rhythm in sync, I didn't see any concern in his eye. I couldn't see him thinking. All I saw was a man who just was in complete control. I was like being in the zone for a whole year, really. And I imagine that something will come in and mess with it, perhaps. Pressure of captaincy, thinking
pitches?
About other things. Quicker pitches definitely could be it. In Australia, Cummins and Hazelwood will really look to target
the left arm angle of Stark. Another thing.
So he falls over a bit with that. So that'll happen. But we did witness. I mean, it was glorious to watch, wasn't it? Because this was how batting should be. And then at the other end, there was somebody kind of petrified and trying to work through their technique, or looking like they're buffeted in a wind or whatever else. And the contrast between two players who reached the very top level of the game, and how one appeared to have total mastery and the other, it was always a struggle, was one of the compelling things to watch in the series, I think. Like Kohli being a good example of that. When watching Kohli, I saw his brain thinking.
Yeah.
So we'd say, oh, right, he's got his feet moving, but he's got his feet moving almost deliberately. It's almost like you could see the brain going, right, front foot, out to ball. Yeah. Like watching the beginning of late Ricky Ponting, when Ricky Ponting going towards the end of his career, it was like a forced gesture. And you felt that with Kohli, which is why, I never really expected Kohli to go on and get a big score, because he wasn't released from his own brain enough in this series yet.
That is actually a pet analogy of mine. I think Kohli is the closest thing to Ponting since Ponting. in every way, I think.
Yeah.
In the way he commits to the front foot, to sort of try and attack that fourth and fifth stump, and he scores a lot of runs because there are very few fielders in front of the wicket on the offside, so there are a lot of runs to be had. But both of them, bowlers, I think, often have wisened up, and Kohli's always had this problem where, if you have a bowler who can really hit the pitch, then occasionally the back of a length hit. If he hits the pitch on a back of a length and the ball rises a little bit, then both Ponting and Kohli would find themselves fending a little bit. That's why I think Kohli has so many dismissals on the fifth or sixth stump to back of length ball. This is something I found when I did the ball tracking study of these people. I'll post it for readers. I've still not come to the real sort of my real ulterior motive of doing all these podcasts, which is to talk about bowling. But I do want to hear about Root's figures, because I am curious as to what has to happen to go from 2 years of 30 to, I don't know, 400, 300s.
So in control numbers, if you're looking at around this series, if you were drawing one false response every 5 balls, that was mostly like normal English conditions. If it was one every 4 balls, it was extreme, and 1 in 6, you could almost say it's flat. We are so used to 1 in 5. Root over this series has one false shot every 7 balls.
Yeah. So
and in the last series, through 2018, when India went to England, he had a false shot once every 5 balls. So back then he was batting normally, and now he's in like real purple patch.
And one thing to be said in this series, the Root has found himself batting a lot in the middle of Test matches. Third day, fourth day, late on the second day. He's sort of not really played much on the first morning, for instance. Although when he did at Lords, he did make 60, which was wasn't it? No, at Trent Bridge, he made 60 at Trent Bridge. That was a great innings, which was ended by Shardul Thakur getting him to play like 2 stumps outside the line. But onto the main events. Everyone's talked about Jasprit Bumrah as much as I like him. I mean, he's a great bowler and all that. But really, I think the unheralded there were 2 unheralded geniuses in this series. I think one was Ravindra Jadeja and the other was Ollie Robinson. I think Robinson, everybody recognizes that he's a find, but I think he's more than a find. I think he's if you take sort of his first class record and then his Test record. Firstly, Daniel, where has he been? Why has he not played before this? If he's this good right now, he was 90% of this last year, at least.
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, without a doubt. I think he may have gained a bit from being in and around the England team environment. He'd have had different coaches. He'd have been having more high-intensity nets. He's probably been working harder on fitness and all those kind of things that allow him to bowl longer spells and retain his pace. So there'll be something of that happening. But actually, the reason is that England have had a relatively plentiful supply of bowlers in the last few years. So Robinson has only probably in the last three years been properly on the radar. So 2018, 19, 20, let's say. Now, Jofra Archer came on board in 2019. Broad and Anderson are already there, and Stokes is the ubiquitous all-rounder. So, and you've got Chris Wokes, who's got unbelievable figures in England, who is criminally forgotten by most people when they think about England's best bowling attack. So there was no real necessity for him. And rather than having him come in and be a spare part and do nothing, then it was much better that he go around and tear up county teams and bowl more and more and more and just get more miles in his legs. So I think that was the reason. Then kind of necessity hit really with all of the injuries. I'm not sure he would have played, if Archer had been available and Broad had been available at the start of the Indian summer, it's not guaranteed he would have got in the side despite his excellent debut. Had there been because don't forget the IPL players weren't available for the first 2 matches of England summer. So that took out people like Stokes. And so there was all this talk about how you balance a side. I mean, now he looks not just irreplaceable, he's absolutely necessary. And people have made comparisons with, say, Hazelwood, because he's got a similar kind of frame and he attacked a similar kind of length.
I think he's similarly deceptively quick.
Yep, that's one thing he definitely is. And a lot of it is actually, he claims to have mastered wobble seam from Jimmy Anderson. And you do see that sometimes, the beauty of wobble seam with English conditions on the first couple of days is that the movement is so much later than swing. So the batter's got to respond to a ball that's only, 2-3 yards away from them when it deviates spectacularly. Whereas on swing, unless it's really good, really late swing, like we saw from Bumrah, you've got just a little bit more time. And so, he's added that to his game, and he's attacked the stumps a lot more. The nip backer from Robinson has happened way more. He's been not unlucky with LBW decisions, but on another day, he might have got a few more as well, because there were, umpires' calls, which obviously, because of their nature, could have gone either way. So he was always in the game for England, and he's probably their most important find of this summer by a mile, I think.
Yeah, Sid, England have always had that kind of bowler, the really tall fast bowler. The back in the day, before my time and your time, but still in Daniel's time, they had Bob Willis, and they had Hardison, and then they had Tremlett for a while, and they tried to have Alex Tudor, but didn't work out, mainly because he's not accurate enough. But England have always wanted to have that kind of bowler, the tall bowler who could hit the wicket on a back of a length, and get players hopping. But it seems to me that there's more to Robinson than that. I mean, he's just got a lot more class than say Tremlett. No,
he's the closest to Stuart Broad you could get in his absence. They hit that length which is not drivable, but it's still full enough to take the edge. They are at you all the time, and they rely more on seam than swing.
England went with a kind of strategy, didn't they, for Australia? Because they're forever trying to work out how to win in Australia, and they had that strategy of Finn. Let's not forget Finn. I mean, it was almost 6 foot 7, 6 foot 8. They actually, release height is really interesting here, because Broad, while being tall, am I right in saying, Sid, he's got a lower release height than Anderson, and Robinson has got the second highest release height in the world at the moment after Jameson,
So what I remember of Broad in 2018 is he extracted the most uneven bounce in that season. It could have to do with him bowling fourth innings in 4 of the 5 test matches, but still he did more uneven bounce than Anderson or Vokes. Or who was the third?
Is that because of the cross seam?
Yeah, it could be. I think it could be, because he loves to bowl a cross seam ball, especially when they're attempting to scuff it up to do reverse swing. So the cross seam ball sometimes is not there, is it? Just as a ball in its isolation, it's there because what they want to do to the physical object of the ball, which is something I think that, again, people watching don't always totally appreciate.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to get on a tangent here when we're talking of reverse swing. At the Oval Test, no pundit, no commentator expected any reverse swing. And on the 5th day, post-lunch, there is reverse swing. And my theory for that is that Jadeja was allowed to keep banging it in the rough, and it could have roughened up the ball.
I think that's genius. That is genius, because you're absolutely right. I was trying to work out where it had come from. I thought perhaps the square itself had got a bit drier, because it's a massive square at the Oval, so the outfield was really lush.
It's all the way to the boundary at both sides, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And quite a lot of balls were hit along it. So I was starting to think, is that it? But actually, I think Sid's theory is much more strong, because Jadeja did wheel away. He bowled over after over in that morning session into that rough and was just kicked away time and time again. And then suddenly, after lunch, boom.
That's the driest, most abrasive surface the ball met in the whole match.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. It makes total sense. And I'm really annoyed that you didn't just slip me that by text or email, and then I could have sounded like I really knew what I was talking about on air. But thanks, Sid.
No, I think actually India. I think India was surprised by how dry it was.
Yeah, no, but I think that's exactly it. Now I look back on it and I think about the sequence of events. That feels very much likely, actually, because it was such a surprise. And Bumrah found that it was his fastest spell, I believe, of the summer.
Yep.
And it was the first time we'd seen reverse swing really all summer. And it broke the game. I mean, it was another reason why the Hasib Hamid dismissal was so important, because Hamid, if he'd been playing in his pre-lunch mode, not looking to score any runs, he would have just said to himself, right, well, this spell with Bumrah and Jadeja bowling in tandem has to be repelled, because Bumrah won't be able to keep bowling. So they tactically got that wrong in the way that India, I think, with their batting have been tactically correct. They've thought on their feet better than England have, not in every game or in every innings rather, but generally speaking, they have adapted to the conditions better than England's batters did. And Root and Hamid, I think, took the wrong option at the wrong time.
I'm not convinced.
Hamid had the role that Pujara had at Gabba in the fourth innings. Similar target, similar asking rate, but Pujara never veered off his.
I'm not convinced by the whole India thing better on their feet. I think India have better equipment to work with.
Yeah, flatter wickets, India are better equipped.
I mean, in the sense, I think when Moeen is losing his length twice an over, there's not much you can do with him that you can do with Jadeja, who's, magnificent in his control.
Yeah, I guess. Well, it could be that. It could be that.
I did a calculation, for instance, Daniel. I did a calculation, right? Jadeja gave India 120 overs in the series at 2.2 an over. Moeen gave England 100 overs at 3.3 an over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
If you say Moeen's bowling, and both sides played 4 and 1, right? If you say that both were expected to give the same number of overs, right? Then Jadeja conceded 135 runs less than Moeen. 135 runs in 4 tests is more than Ajinkya Rahane made in the whole series. It's one extra lower order batsman or one out of form middle order batsman extra. It's like playing 11 against 12, and that is why I think Ravindra Jadeja is a genius.
Karthik, I think then Ashwin should be playing in place of Rahane.
No.
I agree with Sid. I agree with Sid entirely. I think Jadeja is is good enough batter that why not? And Ashwin's better batter. Why not? You can create the dream team. You can have 4 and 2. You can have 4 and 2. I mean, how brilliant is that?
Yeah, and then next will come after Kohli.
Don't give him ideas. Kohli might actually do that. I wouldn't put it past him to play like 6 bowlers.
That's the thing with Kohli. Like his latest, his latest brainstorm is the universal truth that has stayed. That has endured the test of time. Like he's a guy who's gone into 2 or 3 series with 6 batters and done decently or badly, it doesn't matter. And then suddenly his latest fashion in his head is 5 bowlers. So he says, if I play 4 bowlers, that means I'm not even playing to win. I'm just playing for a draw or a loss. Yeah. And he started the Australia series with 6 batters. Only when he left did Rahane replace him with a bowler. And India started winning, and suddenly it has become the universal truth that will never change until the next time he has another brainstorm.
I'm completely in favor of playing more bowlers. I think batting is generally just horribly overrated.
But I agree entirely. I mean, look at the numbers.
But I'll tell you something, Daniel. You brought up the Hamid dismissal. We've seen, all 3 of us. We've been through at least a decade of watching test matches where on the 5th day, when the batsmen are hanging on for dear life and, quietly, keeping the bowling out and scoring, 20 runs in 15 overs. And people are tearing their hair out saying, why don't they just rotate the strike? And Hamid's dismissal showed that the amount of, the number of lines of defense you have to concede to give yourself that chance to maneuver the ball,
For a
it
single.
just makes it very, very risky to chase a single. Because Hamid basically opened himself up. He had no second line of defense.
But that's exactly but it's kind of my point though, because my point is that a team that understands Test cricket and knows how to win, basically. Root and Hamid, when they came out after lunch, should not have been trying to score runs straight after lunch. They should have looked at the fact that Bumrah was coming charging in from the pavilion end, and Jadeja had the ball on a string. So what you do is you bat until Bumrah is off. And you defy everything until Bumrah is off. Now sometimes you can't do that, right? Sometimes the ball is too good. What was annoying, I guess, to watch from a pure batting perspective was that the ball that Hamid got out to was a ball that he just wouldn't have got out to before lunch because he would have kicked it away. And because he was looking to score those runs, that showed like just a bit of naivety between both of them. He had his captain at the other end. I mean, Root, the first ball after lunch, he played a premeditated reverse sweep and Jadeja bowled him a full toss. He hit it for 4. But you thought, hello, this is actually a different way that you're going to address the ball, right? You're going to address the ball to score runs from here. But the moment they saw Bumrah coming on should have been the moment I went, well, we'll wait for a bit. Because that was the threat, And I think it is true that there have been certain points in this series, like the Lords opening partnership that India had, when they addressed the threat. And the big threat was, you're at Lords, you've been put in, grey skies, nippy pitch. It felt to me that Rahul and Rohit left more balls better during that period than they even did at other points.
I think you're right. I think also not bowling at the stumps against Shami and Bumrah on the 5th day was also
well, that was shocking tactical naivety.
Mad.
And totally insane. It was the craziest bit of cricket I've ever seen. I sat down to commentate, and I was doing it for that was one I was doing for SEN off the telly.
Yeah.
And as I sat down, I think that Sharma had just got out.
Yeah.
But I wasn't quite prepared. So I looked and I saw this batsman was there, and I couldn't see a slip and I couldn't see a close fielder. And then I thought, hang on a minute, is a top order batter still in? Hang on, this is
just like right. 2 people out for the hook or something.
Into an alternative universe. And then I saw Bumrah's stats come up, average 4.13. I'm thinking, what? And then they pan back and you see there's a deep backward square, a long leg, deep backward square, a deep mid wicket, as if Jasprit Bumrah is going to hit Mark Wood in front of square for 6. I mean, in the name of all that's holy, I was just utterly bamboozled by this madness. So, and they admitted that they got it wrong. But isn't that incredible that you can get something so wrong? I mean, you wouldn't get that wrong in any amateur. I've not seen an amateur game where someone's got something that wrong.
And it's not
incredible.
It's not like you have Archer and Wood is injured, which annoys me no end. That a fast bowler would go running after a ball and slide and dive, which it should be banned.
Why would you do that? You just say 1 run. Just let it go.
Yeah, fast bowlers are too valuable to risk injuries. They should be banned from diving.
Because everybody's got to be performatively kissing the badge. We're doing it for the 3 Lions.
Yeah.
Look how much effort I'm putting in for the team. But why don't people stop and go every now and then? It's not being horribly arrogant to say, my role in the team is to bowl fast, isn't it? I've got to be able to bowl fast. I've got to look after myself so that I can bowl fast. I'd be letting the team down, actually, if I break myself trying to save 1 run. But they're not encouraged to think like that. What they get called is wholehearted cricketers, and they care for the team and this, that, and the other. And I'm sure they do, but it's misguided care.
Yeah.
But I do genuinely believe that 30, 40 years ago, that didn't happen. I mean, you saw a fast bowler and the ball would roll back to him from the batsman, and he'd look at it with contempt. Who's coming to pick that up? Come on, pick it up, place it in my hand. The idea they would run after the ball is crazy. So you expect me to do that? Send the kid. So somebody would have to run from extra cover down to 3rd man rather than the gully. That's how it should be.
The most annoying sight in this whole series. Asif Hamid, I'm sure, is a very nice fellow, But the most annoying sight was watching Hasib Hamid, racing after balls, diving in the boundary and saving one run. Like, I don't know how many times he did that. I have no idea why
no.
he.
I don't mind him doing that because he is
Exactly
the most compelling man to watch on a cricket field. Now you wouldn't have been able to see it, Kartikeya, because you weren't out the ground, right? But I spent 20 minutes of a commentary stint just looking at Hasib Hamid in the field because he is the most expressive and fascinating man. He sometimes he looks at the ground.
Still.
No, he's never still. He he moves his arms from side to side. He shimmies occasionally.
Yeah.
Sometimes, to keep himself interested, he'll crouch down like a panther and then make sort of creeping up on you from behind moves. His shoulders will shimmy. He'll go for a little walk and then he'll come back and he'll gaze at the ground again and then he'll gaze at the sky. And it's absolutely mesmerizing. I mean, there's nothing that man.
You think it's just nerves?
No, I think this is how he keeps himself going. Because I don't think he's a naturally brilliant fielder, but I think what he's got to do.
He's an enthusiastic fielder.
He's enthusiastic, absolutely. I think what he's doing is just keeping himself. He knows he's out in the field for ages. It was when India scored 466 that he was particularly trying to keep himself motivated because he's a normal human being. And you put yourself in his position. How unbearably boring is it watching really good cricketers be able to face balls on a flat deck and you're just waiting for him
Is he a real short leg or is he there just because he's the newest guy? Because India did that. India did that in Australia. They have a real short leg in Rohit Sharma. It's a very good short leg. But because Shubman Gill is new, they put him there. And Shubman Gill is not a short leg. He's a lot of things, but he's not a short leg. I mean,
Ollie Pope is.
He looks like a cat wearing pads at short leg. I mean,
completely. It's utterly absurd. It's utterly absurd. But England have Ollie Pope, and they didn't use him, and he has been a good short leg. Yeah. So no, I think that is the one bit of the old philosophy that I was talking about earlier that they need to ditch is put the young man at short leg, and the bit of the old philosophy they need to keep is don't expect your fast bowlers to do anything other than bowl fast and then stand like a statue in the field.
and catch what comes to them.
Pretty much what Ishant Sharma does, I mean.
That's right. Yeah. Well, he's got it right.
If you don't value yourself, your captain is not going to value yourself. They'll expect you to run after balls.
Yeah.
So, Sid, in 2018, after the 2018 series, India lost 1-4. And, Ravi Shastri in his, as it turned out, presently, but at that time, it sounded like, what was then considered his bombast. He said, this is the best Indian side in the last 20 years. And since then, he's been proven right. And more, I think. But I think I have a simple explanation for why that is. And it is that India now have a very simple approach in the field, which is that if the conditions allow any of their bowlers to attack all out, they attack all out. And if they don't let you score. And in 80 out of 80 overs, most days, they have bowlers who can deliver this. They have bowlers who can kill the scoring over after over after over. They don't have bowlers where, the batsman, the captain sort of hopes they'll bowl to their field. They have bowlers who will bowl to their field. And if they don't play the next game.
A very good example of that was the last day, first session.
Yeah.
Where, people would have said the session was shared, just a couple of wickets fell.
Yeah.
But the pressure that they created with just over after over of no scoring, as Dan said, that England came out batting differently because they were forced to bat differently because if they were batting normally, they were not getting the runs, and Jadeja was just bowling ball after ball in that rough, and it was behaving differently after landing in the same spot. So that session was a great example of India being able to, when the wickets are not coming, to still have a good session where they go for just 60 runs and take a wicket. And they take great pride in those kind of sessions, which early, and the other big difference is it's not just one or two.
Yeah.
The huge difference between Dhoni's India and Kohli's India is that Dhoni always had one or two really good bowlers, but now they have at least four really good bowlers, which makes a
you're right, but I'll tell you something. In that, when was it? Oh yeah, at the Oval. India bowled out for 190, and England were what 60 for 5 or something like that. And then you had Bairstow and Pope, and the wicket was flattening out, and India was still attacking. Siraj and Thakur, Daniel, if you remember, they were still bowling at the stumps. They were still bowling straight. They still had the mid wicket, and they were still going for the wicket. They were still bowling at the stumps, hoping that something will nip off the pitch and beat the bat and get a LBW or get a catch. It didn't happen. He went for 16 in an over. Yeah. And the next 3 overs, Thakur, who's not like particularly great bowler, he moved his line to the off stump, and he got 3 overs where he conceded 1 each. That I think comes from like knowing like what is the plan, what is the fallback plan if this doesn't work, and it's I don't know how, but it's been drilled into them that is what they're supposed to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I would say is that it's not original. I mean, this is exactly how England became number 1 in 2010, 11, 12, around that era, because it was a combination of 2 factors that the bowlers did exactly what you've just described. So they would under attack, it felt like when you were watching, but you had to rely on Broad and Anderson knowing what they were doing, and Swan would bowl an unbelievably unattacking line on day 1 if he found himself and he could bowl 20 overs, a bit like Jadeja. Rotate the seamers at the other end, and the other part of the equation was that you have batters who know the game inside out, and so they won't get frustrated. So the term bowling dry came into English cricket not coincidentally at the same time as they became the best team in the world, because that's exactly what you're doing in a test match. You're assessing how the conditions are at any given moment and bowling to those conditions, attack when you need to attack, defend when you need to defend. You then have to back it up with batters who have adapted to conditions similarly. Like, this is why I think the Pant-Thakur partnership shows that the same kind of game intelligence is happening in the batting as the bowling. The two have to marry up, because batters could easily have thrown it away there and then made the bowlers' lives that much harder and made the balance between attack and defence much harder for them to work out. And that's what India's batters did to themselves in the lower order and earlier on the series at top order, and something that England didn't do consistently, because England bowlers actually followed a similar template. I mean, thinking back on, we mentioned Stephen Finn today. Yeah. So ruthless was the notion of bowling dry that he was dropped after 2 test matches in the Ashes series of 2010-11.
Yeah.
Because he'd taken more wickets than anyone else, but he'd gone at nearly 4 and over. So they went, right, you're out of the side because we've got to win this Ashes. And they brought in Tremlett and Bresnan, who were able to bowl a dry plan. Much like Thakur, Bresnan, Thakur, you could kind of imagine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think Bresnan was slightly better bowler, but.
But you know what I mean? Essentially, they're performing a similar kind of
player,
role.
Yeah.
And so, you have to have the personnel to be able to do it. And good test sides, like the Aussie test side of the 90s, 2000s, had both sides of their game sorted out. Their batting was going to be solid and reactive and intelligent to back up their bowlers. And at the moment, England have got one half of that and not 2. And India have got pretty much 2. I mean, you'd say there are a couple of holes in there that can be filled, but I think there are Indian players who could fill them. In one way, I agree with Sid. Just accept that Jadeja is a batter, like Wilf Rhodes, who also happens to be a bowler, like Wilf Rhodes, and just play him as your number 5 instead of Rahane. Bring Ashwin in as your notional all-rounder. Right? It's just that Jadeja is excellent at everything. Doesn't mean he's an all-rounder. He's a batter and he's a bowler. You've just got 2 players in one. That's what's happened there.
Yeah. There's so much pressure to get in an extra batter because the batting is struggling. And they go and think, okay, who's coming in? Vihari and Jadeja last 2-3 years. But Jadeja is better, if not the same as Vihari. So
he has one huge advantage, Jadeja, which is that he's a lefty, and there isn't a lefty as far as you can see in the batting side on India.
Well,
there's Pant, and then there's Jadeja, and then there's basically nobody else who bats left-handed in all of India, it seems.
I was really surprised it took as long as it did for Jadeja to bat ahead of Pant, because Pant so far in this on this tour was not behaving like a batter.
Wasn't it brilliant that they did? You see, because they did it at the Oval after losing. I know in retrospect it looked crazy, but it's because they keep thinking Jadeja's an all-rounder rather than just accepting him that he's two different players. They basically take the field with 12 players. That's what happens when you play Jadeja. He gets classified in both areas: batsman, bowler. Simple. So because they couldn't do that, because in their brains he must be an all-rounder, then Punt was ahead of him. But once they lost the game, and it was brilliant that he was advanced ahead of Rahane as well. I mean, I just thought that was such a power move. It didn't work in the first innings, but it doesn't matter. It was still the right thing to do. It was brilliant.
I think it was just a case of them thinking, okay, you've been bowling at right-handers happily for a really long time in this series. Here's a left-hander at an earlier stage than you had one so far. That was pretty much all.
Yeah, but they didn't send Punt to do that. They sent Jadeja to do that because they know deep down Jadeja's an actual batter.
Jadeja has a defense. Punt hasn't got one.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly,
Punt defense and hope. I mean,
interestingly, once he got better conditions to at the Oval, once he got better conditions to bat in, Punt defended really well. I think his game is
flat. Of course, it's flat. Punt uses his defense to stop balls which he can't hit.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite an uncomplicated and correct way of thinking about it.
That's what batting is. That's what defense.
I think that's absolutely the way Colin de Grandon goes about it. Ball, whack it. No, stop it. Whack it. Yes, whack it. Stop it. Stop
you
it.
see,
Whack it. Whack it.
Right. The problem with that. But the problem with that, Daniel, and this is a problem which every player of that type, from Gilchrist down and Sehwag and Gilchrist, everybody has faced, is that when the ball is doing a little bit, the range of deliveries which fall within, okay, I can hit it, and okay, I need to stop it, is huge. Every other ball is going to be in that in-between range. And then you have to have a defense to actually, defend. You can't just sort of stop everything with that attitude. All of Punt's dismissals are like him shaping to play a booming cover drive. Ball is not there, and so he's poking at it 2 yards in front of everybody. And sometimes the poke goes to extra cover, and sometimes it goes to gully, and sometimes it goes to first slip. It's the same problem every time.
So that's why you've got to bat him at 7 and take him for what he is. On his good days, he's going to.
I don't mind that because his basic job is still to keep wickets, I think.
Which he did rather well, I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, there was this prevailing notion some time ago that he wasn't a proper keeper, but for the most part, I thought he kept. Actually the best example is at Lords, where it's unbelievably difficult to save buys, and he didn't actually save all his buys, but he did save more than he might otherwise have done because it's so weird there. I mean, it's like nowhere else on earth. It just does this weird swinging after it leaves, and he was actually dead agile. I mean, he's technically still a little strange. He did. The very best keepers move from side to side, but you don't see them do it. So he's still a bit of a diver, a bit like Bairstow. Bairstow's a classic diver, isn't he? Whereas someone like John Simpson, who came into the England team this year to play 3 ODIs, you just have no idea how he got there. He's gone down the leg side and he's still on both his feet. And he's taking it with both hands. Ben Folkes, a bit like that. MS Dhoni used to fall from side to side, but I think Punt's getting just better at it, isn't he? Well, he did, didn't he? It was a bit like his feet were nailed to the ground.
But Punt's problem while keeping is that, he's measured against Wriddhiman Saha, who's better.
Yeah, of course.
Of
course. Well, but that's not a problem in England. I mean, Folkes is by far and away the best keeper in England. And he goes out of the conversation very quickly because people are so seduced by the idea of Bairstow and Buttler, even though Folkes would probably score exactly the same number of runs. It's just the way Buttler and Bairstow score their runs is thought to be better. And with Bairstow, it's true, actually. When we watched him this series, he had such a curious series because he looked like a man in form. Do you know, he got out between 28 and 30 6 times this calendar year, which is a record for getting out between 28 and 30. And I choose those because it's a very indicative number. You know, it shows that you're seeing the ball well. It's because he was doing it always with a strike rate of about 70, 65, 70. And yet he was continually getting out. Butler, on the other hand, goes through these periodic phases where you project onto Butler this imagination of great beauty, and what we're about to see is superb. And I'm more guilty of that than any other human. But the reality is that if he's struggling a little bit for form, you really see it.
With Butler, I have a theory that in the limited overs game, when Butler's batting, he can bat for a year in the white ball game and never have a mid wicket and never have a extra and never have a cover. You know,
Cover
because
point.
he has a cover point, right?
Yeah.
And in a test match, he has both all the time. In fact, sometimes he has 2 mid wickets. You know, and sometimes he has a gully and a cover point. You know, and I think it's just a case of, you know, he's just not used to batting against that.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know. I don't quite know if that's the case. I mean, I saw one of his...
Because, you see, Daniel, what happens in the limited overs game with only 4 fielders outside the boundary is that a lot of teams are basically, you know, go into that ultra defensive thing where they have all the boundary fielders on the leg side and nobody on the off side, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I take the point. I take the point entirely. But I think when he's... It again comes back to watching somebody thinking.
Yeah.
And when you can see somebody's thinking. So when Butler played last year against Pakistan in a terrific partnership with Wokes that won the game inside a bubble.
Yeah.
They made 280, right?
Yeah. But it was a brilliant partnership. It was really surprising because actually the pitch was spitting. Naeem was getting the ball. Somebody got a horrible lifter for Pope that got him out. The pitch looked like it was playing tricks. And Butler came in with an incredibly serene expression and a clear will and purpose because he was now chasing down a target on a pitch that was doing stuff. And there was no escaping this situation. This is what needed to be done. And he had a clarity of mind. When he plays, especially in the first innings of a test match, he comes out and there's so much more of the game to go.
Yeah.
Then his mind, you can see his mind intruding and thinking, so am I the person who's about to take the game by the scruff of the neck because we're in the luxurious position, or am I now being forced back into the reconsolidate the score? Because he often comes in at ludicrous situations for England, 120 for 5, or potentially 255. And actually, when he comes in those first innings situations and he's got space, and they call it, this is classic, this is why Butler's picked. He's always out early. He did it in a similar situation, second innings at the Oval, the last time India played in 2018, when England were building a lead, and he walked out, and the idea was, what, a quick 40, 50 from Butler will be marvellous. He was out first ball or second ball, skying one, I think, to backward point or something, totally disappointing. So it's not clarity of purpose for him until he knows precisely what the purpose is. Whilst there's an ambiguity about his role as he comes out to bat, that's when you see the different Butler. And he just needs, in an ideal world, Butler is always batting in the 4th innings, England needing some runs to win. And that's his purpose in the team, really.
You don't think the moving ball is a problem?
Not overly, because I think, especially by the time he comes in, often, well, a new ball might suddenly have happened, but he tends to come in this England team with about 50 overs that have been bowled. So he's up against a softer ball generally. I think it might be his thoughts about the moving ball, definitely. You know, because imagine if you are Joss Butler and you are aware of what you do against the white ball, you're bound to ask yourself whether because everybody has an imposter syndrome. Am I here because of the things I do against a different ball? And then you overthink. You know.
I guess Rohit Sharma went through that for a while.
Yeah. I think Rohit Sharma did go through that. You're right. But do you guys think Leach would have played if Stokes was available?
Yeah, he would have played at least one game if Stokes had been available. Yeah.
Because last time Adil Rashid played all the games, I think, and not just Moeen. So like England like to go with one spinner if they can, one proper spinner if they can, and which only happens if you have Stokes.
But the failure to realise that Moeen was the problem to their situation right at the beginning, really, the moment Stokes wasn't available, was obviously Moeen time, because that does then give you, it gives you a bounce. And incidentally, for Moeen, I think Moeen needs to be treated more like Jadeja. And if he's going to be useful for England, he needs to bat much higher up the order. Than he continues to be put down below and below. So in an ideal world, I'd have him where Stokes was going to be. That would be how I would play him.
And that's also the amount of bowling he has to do.
Correct. And then Leach, you can actually pick Leach in that situation.
Because I think if you have a holding spinner, I think it's no good having a holding spinner who can't
hold,
who's not metronomic.
Yeah, but England don't have one of those. I mean, that is their big.
Well, Leach is like that. I mean, Leach could.
Leach, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Leach is like that. But if you imagine where they began the series, in their minds, they were thinking, we want Broad, Anderson, Robinson, right? And if you have Leach in there as well, so Robinson is now 8. Broad is completely. I mean, Leach is 9, because Broad has abdicated all responsibility for using his bat in anything other than the cause of savagery, and Anderson. is 11. So you then leave Butler coming in at 7 and massively exposed. Although I might argue that it probably helps Butler, because then he gets clarity of thought, because he looks at what's left and goes, right, crap, I've got to maximise the amount of runs I score right now. And that might actually help him understand his role. And then you could have Moeen at 5 or 6 with Pope at 5 or 6.
They were seduced by the idea of Sam Curran, I think.
They were, yeah. He's basically a statistical anomaly, Sam Curran. It'll blow your mind. Let me see if I can find the stat for you right here. So, if you look,
this is in Zaltzman's.
This is in Zaltzman's thing. So let me give you a little flavour. So every single player in the England squad has got all the matches that they played, and it tells you how many matches were won and lost and drawn while they were playing. So, for example, Moeen Ali, 28 wins, 28 losses, 7 draws. I think that now is 28-29, right? Jimmy Anderson as a barometer, 73 wins, 57 losses, 35 draws. Johnny Bairstow, 35-31, 11. Okay. Rory Burns, 12-10, 6. Joe Root, 47-40, 21. Even Chris Wokes, 17-13, 8. Pretty good. Sam Curran, 16-5-3. So he is a massive.
He's a mascot.
Outlier. I mean, basically,
he's a mascot.
He's played 24 games. He's only lost 5, right? He's won 16 of them. So he's won 2/3 of the games, or 2/3 of the games he's played in. England has actually won.
I'm totally convinced that Shardul Thakur is the right-handed Sam Curran now.
Makes sense.
He's got three tests for India, 2 wins, 2 like unbelievable wins out of nowhere, and 1 draw.
Yeah.
He's never lost.
And you know what characterises a Sam Curran or a Thakur is that when you sit down and try to work out your best team, they're never in it, right? You never go, actually, the best Indian team has got Shardul Thakur in it. The best England team's got Sam Curran in it. No. But because they have this spooky ability to either play in games where the rest of the team is playing well or be oddly influential. And I think actually there might be a part of cricket that none of us really understand, which is that because in an average game of cricket, there are about 3 or 4 people from each side who massively change the game, either through centuries or terrific bowling. The bulk of people either disbenefit their team by scoring fewer runs than they should, because an average middle order batter should score 80 runs in each match, let's say, and most of the time they don't. They get fewer than that. So they're not helping their team. And then you have these people who are just ahead of the ledger. They've scored just enough runs and they've taken just the right wickets. And that's something that's very hard to identify. It's just that they do it often enough in games to shift the balance in their side's favour. And Thakur and Curran are both those people. But I think England were right to let him go for the last what would have been 2 games, because the pitches that he was finding himself playing on, because he didn't play him right as well. So, we were talking earlier about how the very start of the matches were all English test matches, and by the end of them, they were all subcontinental matches, really, because the way the pitches had changed so drastically through the drainage and whatever. Curran needs, if he's going to play, needs to bowl with either the new ball or very close to the new ball, because that is what he can do. He then becomes essentially an attempt at bowling dry option, which he hasn't yet got. He can bowl dry with a white ball, because bowling dry with a white ball is going at 7 and over. But with a red ball, it's not that. He doesn't have the protections. He doesn't have the field where he wants him to be, and all that kind of thing. So, he's a very difficult person to work out what you do with if you're an England fan. You've got to have a much better team, I think, for Sam Curran to be in it.
So both Curran and
he could play for India. He could play for India.
Both Curran and Thakur are Dhoni's favourites at CSK.
Yeah. I'm not
Shardul
typical
Thakur has
Dhoni
kept
players.
out he who shall not be named in this series. So I want to end with a counterfactual, because I think this could have been a very different series in its texture. England could have played Archer if players had been fit and available. England could have played Archer, Stone, Wood,
Stokes,
and Anderson and Stokes, and that would have been a very different attack. Would have been a quick attack. And India could have played Gill, in which case I don't know what happens to KL Rahul. And this could have been a very different series.
Well,
and
KL Rahul would have come in for Rahane after the second.
Exactly.
Test.
Exactly.
India has no intention of dropping any batsman. I have a theory that they actually keep the batsmen on when they're in bad form, just to spite people, because people are on their backs so much that there's a bloody mindedness about them. They say, we are not going to drop. Do what you like.
I don't know how the bowlers feel about it, though.
This Indian batting, without Kohli for 3 test matches in Australia, and effectively without Rahane for all 4 test matches in England, they have scored enough runs to win 4 out of 8 test matches in Australia and South Africa and England.
Yeah.
And you take all the great, big names, big 4, big 5, all these people who have been wrapped up in these grand titles and whatnot, they never did that.
No, I was not getting there. I was saying a bowler is doing well. He has like one bad day and he gets dropped, and he's sitting on the sidelines thinking, "Wow, we are getting dropped for one mistake, and here are these batters who are."
It's even worse than that. Bowler's doing fine, bowling well. Morning of the test match, he's like, I might have a little nigger, 90% gone, out. There's no way India are playing a fast bowler who's at 90% now. It's just not going to happen.
And that's why that's the difference, you see, because your big 4s, your Laxmans, Tendulkars, Dravids, etc.
Yeah, they would play them on one leg. I mean,
yeah, if they were batting with the bowling that India currently have, that could have been fearsome, because they would have been in situations that were even more comfortable.
Do you think so?
I'm not sure.
I'll tell you what I think. That's an interesting counterfactual, because I think Tendulkar was a player in a different class. I think he was really outstanding. I think Rahul Dravid was a very, 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 very good player. But I mean, the rest of them on these wickets where it's seaming so much, I don't think they would have done that much better than any of these guys.
Yeah, well,
not better at all. Yeah. I'd go so far.
I'm not sure that they wouldn't have done better than Rahane. But
No,
yeah,
Rahane has a career record which is at least as good as Lakshman's at comparable periods in their career.
well, that's a very fair point. That is a very fair point. I suppose
And
it's because
slightly better than Ganguly. I mean, pretty much everybody has a better record than Ganguly, but that's...
I mean, Ganguly, I don't know why I even mentioned his name, because that was...
Because there was no Jadeja in that era, so you had to play
because
six.
because he is the opposite of the player who shall not be named. He must be named at every opportunity,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
Also, I think Sid is right. There's no Jadeja in that era, so
So you didn't have the luxury to play five bowlers in that era.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. So Jadeja is playing in my fantasy team here because we're allowed to put him in as part of the bowling attack, even though he's actually it's your number 5 in this team. Where you've got Sehwag, Tendulkar, Dravid, Laxman, and if we have to, Ganguly, then Jadeja is in at 6, and then you have to take the Indian team that's now from Pant down to 11, and I reckon it might have made the top order batters' lives even easier.
Yeah,
I think I'll keep this in. I'll keep this in, but Daniel, you just in sort of 10 short words, you just waged war on entire armies of trolls.
Well, there is that danger, of course.
No Dhoni,
Oh no! You can't. You're not allowed to have Dhoni. No, because no. Well, it's not. That's not the reason. The reason is I'm just simply saying that would these great batters have had better averages if they had gone out to bat after having been taking the field with those great bowlers that England currently have.
I think the Tendulkar of the 90s in this team would have meant basically that
unbeatable. Yeah.
I mean, because the Tendulkar of the 90s was a player and a half. I mean, I think listeners might sort of think of it this way, right? Every batter has a range of lines and lengths that they can hit for runs, and a range of pitches on which a smaller or larger subset of those lines and lengths are realistically available for them to hit for runs. And I think in the 90s, Tendulkar had sort of the widest range of lines and lengths which he could hit for runs, and play his shots and hit for runs.
I'm bound to say Lara because I've never seen.
I think Lara in the early 2000s, I think approached that. I think he got there, but and I think I didn't really see much of Lara in the early 90s, but he must have been something because he scored a lot of runs.
When he basically cut back of a length balls off fourth stump for 4 every time. And you know how like Root has that release shot down there for the single, and it's very good. But Lara's he crashed the wrist and took that ball square for 4. So you couldn't have. You basically had to have a deep third and a backward point.
So what you're really saying is that Lara was the god of the offside, not who.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying it would go to 5 sets, and there may be a very long and interesting tie break.
Yeah. Whoever takes a better toilet break wins.
Basically, the one who goes off for 8 minutes. And actually, I don't know. I think that might have been Lara. I think Lara probably would. I mean, we were listening about this the other day. The Mahela Jayawardene getting so close to beating Lara's 375 without out for 374. Imagine when Lara was coming up to Gary Sobers' 365, there was basically an entire ambassadorial fleet. There was Gary Sobers, there were the silver plates of champagne, there were people, ready to. It was the biggest news item ever. There was never any suggestion that he wasn't going to get to 366.
Yeah,
there was no fear of this happening. Partly, I guess, because maybe Gareth Batty was bowling at him, or Andy Caddick on a shirt front in Antigua. But there was a sort of absolute certainty about Lara.
And there's no doubt. It's not like they're saying, "Oh, let's not tempt fate" or anything like that.
Get on with it. What time is it? Have you done it yet? Oh, thank you. I've got another function to get to.
And when Hayden got to 380, you knew that within a year it will be back.
Absolutely, because that's what Lara. If Lara wanted it, Lara was going to get it.
Boy, but there were some roads in the 2000s, weren't they? I mean,
Yeah.
Well, especially in Antigua, yeah.
And there was I remember test matches where, I think a couple of times Pakistan made 600 against India and conceded a first innings lead.
Yeah, great games. Great games.
Where would you put, like you've spoken about Tendulkar and Lara, where would you put AB de Villiers there? I mean, I think I've not seen Tendulkar 90s that closely, but I think AB comes close to.
Yeah. I mean, I think the striking thing about AB de Villiers in Test cricket is that his first 3 Test hundreds came as opener.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing with AB de Villiers is that what you're watching is one of the most naturally gifted hitters of a ball in any sport. He's on badminton, table tennis, whatever. And it's absolutely clear when you look at him that he has got ridiculous hand-eye skills. So I suppose it's hard to compare them because Tendulkar and Lara were like cricketers who developed innings in front of your eyes in ways that were recognisable. Whereas with de Villiers, you're sort of watching an exhibition of superhuman hand-eye coordination. That's the only way I can sort of think about it, really. Or at least that's how it felt when I was watching it. I never really looked at de Villiers' technique. I was interested in the way he addressed the ball, really.
I always thought that in 2018, India sort of ran out of players, that England had extra depth with both bat and ball, often because of the same players. And in 2021, that was no longer the case. Is that because England are on a sort of a downward slope, or is that because India have just become that much better?
It's not that England are in a downward slope; they're in a kind of malaise. Really, it's the same place. So there are two factors in this. One is availability of primary selections, so they weren't able to rotate bowlers in a way they would want to. Whereas India could do that. They put Shami out, brought Umesh Yadav in, what have you. England couldn't do that because they just simply didn't have enough fit and available bowlers. We talked about Stone and Archer and Stokes, most importantly, and Wokes initially. He played the 4th test. The other part of it is that they are going through a phase where they don't have batters. Joe Root is the last person to come into the England side and average 40 in Test cricket. He made his debut in 2012. And whether this is a structural thing, I genuinely don't 100% know, because there are plenty of times when Rory Burns has come into side, having played at the Oval for years and played quite a lot of 4-day cricket in the height of summer. And he's the most productive England opener since Alistair Cook came in. And he's only averaging 30 something or other, but that's still better than most of his predecessors, and he scored more runs and he looks more like he can do it. So it's not just that the county system isn't developing batters. I think it's that they're just going through a phase when there aren't as many capable ones, and the best ones that there are young, and they've been brought into the side too young. So Pope is one that definitely is a class player. You could see by his innings at the Oval in the first innings. He's a terrific player, and he'll be around for years and years and years. And Crawley will be around for years and years and years. But there's this hiatus while they have to wait for them to be reliably productive at Test level. And at that age, and with the experience they've got, because there are too many of them in the side at any given time, they're in situations that are particularly difficult. They're not like Ian Bell coming into the England side in 2005 behind, Strauss, Trescothick. It's kind of Peterson. It's kind of a different world that they're having to learn their batting in. And I reckon there are some younger batters out there who'll be good enough to play Test cricket for England, but not for a few years yet. And India had more players. They had more players out there in the squad, that more of them were fit. They were carrying fewer injuries, so their bowlers could be rotated. And they did have options that they didn't really use, because he must not be named. They didn't need to use. And they responded to the loss of Gill in the first game by miraculously finding the most productive opening partnership in England for the last, decade, I think, was Andy Zoltan's stat.
Yeah.
So,
And by finding a player who hasn't played a first-class game since 2019.
Well, there you go. So a bit of luck. I mean, and also what we do know in the modern era is that nonsense about how you've got to play loads of cricket. It depends who you are. Rory Burns, who was in brilliant form against New Zealand, coming off the back of 7 county championship matches, and then he looked rusty when the Test matches started. He hadn't played any. Other players, Dawid Malan looked great in making 70, having played 1 first-class game. So it's just that is just nonsense tittle tattle from pundits and Twitterati. It's not played enough cricket. That's not how it works.
Yeah, it's different for different players. I mean, it's not the Kohli doesn't want any warm-up games, whereas a Pujara or Rane might. So it's
exactly.
Overall, I tend to agree with what Dan said, that it's not like the teams were like dramatically better or worse than they were in 2018. It's just 2 evenly matched teams where certain moments of luck have much more significance than in any other series where a side is like clearly better than the other. And of course, I mean, we talk about India's 2018-19 tour of Australia, where India won against a side which didn't have Smith and Warner, and that was held as an asterisk against that victory until India now won this year. I mean, if you're comparing, England were like more disadvantaged than Australia were at that time. If you look at Stokes, Broad, Vokes, just in these 3, and then the other replacements who were injured too. So that also was. I mean, if you look at England, at first choice, England, as Karthikeya has already mentioned, would have that attack would be Vokes, Leach, Broad, Robinson, Anderson. Archer. I think Robinson misses out and Archer comes in, and that's like a completely different. And then you add Stokes to it.
They missed Stokes' batting really severely, actually, because Stokes in the last couple of years has become a proper Test match batter and a proper number 5, and they started the series with inexperience. And they gained a little bit, but because their batter was a bit fragile, Stokes would have been a large part. But that doesn't mean that England would have won. I mean, in 2018,
exactly. No, it would have been.
I thought India were the better side in 2018, and they lost.
Yeah.
So I mean, what's curious and really enjoyable about watching India against England in England is that it's rare when you watch Test cricket where the side that's not as good can prevail, because that's kind of the point of Test cricket, and having 5 matches of 5 days each, the better side wins. But actually in England, because conditions can fluctuate so dramatically, and you can be watching 2 Test matches in one, pitches where the pitches have changed nature so much, then so much does depend on when you've got the ball in your hand, and which bowlers have got it at which point, and and just how well the batters respond to that challenge. And I'd say that in this series, unlike in 2018, where I think India did just blink a couple of times, and that's how England went through them. They didn't play as well on occasion. Their batting just wasn't quite as, not ruthless, but just pragmatic. And on this occasion, I think they were a bit more pragmatic at some of the moments in some of the games when they needed to do what they did. They did it. And when England needed to do something, they couldn't quite do it. Partly because India were preventing them, partly because they were batting better in those moments. And by moments, I don't mean, because all of cricket, every moment matters, of course, but the moments change. The nature of the moments change more dramatically in England. When England go to India, they know that at best they might get a day of good batting, unless because India have 2 pitches, don't they? One in which they try to bludgeon you to death with 700, plays 400, or which they did a bit at Chennai, and then they went, oh no, hang on, that's crazy. We've got these guys can't play bloody spin, and we've got Akshay Patel can bowl 60 miles an hour into the dirt, and you prepare those pitches, and you know what the narrative is going to be. I'm not saying it's a wrong thing to do, by the way. I'm just saying that's what you'll see with your eyes. Whereas in England, you'll go, oh wow, this is like a game from the 80s on a green top, and then 2 days later you'll say, this pitch is as flat as fuck. I've never seen anything like it. You can't get anybody out. And that's the same pitch in the same match. So, I guess it rewards fortune a little bit more. And so the less good side can sometimes win.
Thank you. So we've heard, we've had a double century stand from the middle order mainstays from Test Match Special and Cricinfo. But I'll leave you with this thought. I think basically from everything I've seen and all the numbers I've looked at, I think the whole business of batsmen averaging 40 is basically a mirage. I think basically if you look at, Nasir Hussain and Mike Atherton, and Alex Stewart, three mainstays, English mainstays from the 90s. To Indian eyes, they averaged 50 because they averaged 50 against India in that decade. But to West Indian and Australian eyes, they averaged 30. So to India, they were basically, not that different from Joe Root. But to West Indies, they're basically, Sibley or Johnny Bairstow or somebody like that. And I think the number of people who average 40 in an era has to do with the number of deep attacks they face. And I think in this era, basically there have been India, New Zealand, England, Australia, even South Africa, and in some conditions even Pakistan have had unusually deep attacks. There are attacks where you don't get easy overs for hour over. You might get a 5-10 over spell somewhere from an indifferent bowler, like when England bowled Joe Root or something like that. But normally you don't get that. And so basically in any era, if you leave out like the absolute cream of the crop, Smith, Tendulkar, Lara, I'm going to put Peterson in there just because I think I like Peterson. But if you leave out those guys, maybe Kohli, okay, well, let's not make enemies of everybody. If you leave out those guys,
I think that shows you're afraid of one army and not the other. the army of the one who shall not be named and the army of the one you just named.
Well, I've already antagonized the army of the one who shall not be named. But if you leave out like that absolute, the genius level batsman, then below that, whether a player averages 35 or 45 depends on how many of the 9 or 8 attacks they face are good. And if 6 of them are good, they're going to average 35, and if 3 of them are good, they average 45. I think that's.
I don't disagree with you, Kartikeya, and I'm going to leave you with the thought that's kept me awake for about the last 2 weeks, which was one that Jared Kimber said to me after I'd complained about leg buys and how a load of white ball bowlers were getting contracts in the IPL because statisticians had forgotten to point out that they'd given away 8 filthy leg buys in that over by bowling crap down the leg side. And as a result, their figure of 1 over, none for 7 did not adequately reflect just how terribly badly they bowled. He said, well, Daniel, that's because the entire scoring system is completely wrong. And what we need to do is evaluate each ball properly and in its context. So I say, what? So you wouldn't have the same bowling figures. When an edge is dropped at first slip, that's an easy take and it bursts through the hands and goes down for 4, we wouldn't put 4 onto the bowler's numbers. I go, what? Where do they go? It's just, well, you've got to just think of it differently. There's a score that's being tallied up, but there's an evaluation around each bowler. Yeah. And this absolutely freaked me out because then I suddenly realized that we could find out who were the best batters actually, because it would be about full shot percentage. We wouldn't be giving them the runs for the inside edge. We'd only be giving them the runs that came out the middle of the bat. Averages would come right down, but they'd be truer. And then we would really know something.
So that's going back to our
I think it's fitting to give the last word to the keeper of the false shot percentages in this case now.
Yeah. So this is like going back to the cricket we used to play when it's 1-on-1 in our backyard or a front yard, where every time you edge and behind you is the wall. So it doesn't matter. There's no slip who's dropping it. If you edge and it hits the wall in the full, you're out. It's and if if every such mistake was penalized, I think we would have 3-day tests and everyone would be happy, and we could go to IPL as soon as possible, which we are doing now.
Oh.
That was a great way to finish it.
Well, thanks, you guys. Unlike Daniel and Sid, I don't have to watch the IPL if I don't want to. But they do. And good luck to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next test series. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
All right, I'm going to stop the
Did I
recording.